This presentation will identify an example of miscommunication or poor communication in my current work environment and relate the examples to specific concepts from the textbook, such as organization as conversation, patterns of relating, patterns of meeting, and ways of talking, listening, and being an innovation. Then I will attempt to rewrite the story in a way that moves the organization towards its preferred future. Patients in the ER are often held due to an overwhelming patient load on a unit and insufficient staffing within the hospital. Unfortunately, these patients often fall between the cracks because they are not assigned to the ER physician any longer, and the attendings and specialists do not prioritize the emergency department. On this particular day, a patient had a cardiology consult that was called due to an abnormal rhythm and an elevated troponin in the 200s. The patient was unattached, and they did not know who their cardiologist was. This meant that our ER doctor spoke with the cardiologist on call. She obtained orders from this physician and gave him all of the patient's information. He then told her he was going to investigate who the patient's cardiologist was. If the patient was truly unattached, he would continue to follow the patient's care. Otherwise, he would turn the patient over to their proper cardiologist. The cardiologist called back and informed her shortly after that the patient was attached to a cardiologist within the facility, and he turned that care over to the physician moving forward. She, however, never spoke with the other cardiologist. 4 hours later, the patient had a reflex troponin. His troponin had more than quadrupled. I called the attending to make him aware of a critical lab, and he asked me to call the cardiologist. When I attempted to call the new cardiologist, he answered the phone. He was very agitated. He was rude and sharp in tone. He informed me that he knew nothing of this patient, and then hung up the phone before I could tell him anything. I was unable to report the patient's labs or his abnormal rhythm because he hung up before I could tell him anything. There are multiple factors that contributed to this miscommunication. The patient was not involved enough to know who his cardiologist was. He was not playing an active role in his care. This indicates a breakdown in patient-centered care prior to him arriving to the hospital, which only worsened throughout his care in the ER. There was poor communication between the ER doctor and the cardiologist who took over the patient's care. This created a break in the interdisciplinary care of the patient, which has been proven to increase negative patient outcomes. The nurse was unable to advocate for her patient due to a lack of communication between the ER doctor and the nurse, and then again between the nurse and the cardiologist. Finally, the cardiologist was unwilling to listen, and the cardiologist was unwilling to listen to the nurse and work together in the patient's best interest. There was a lack of mutual respect. Some common conversations among staff within the facility include the feeling of being overworked and underpaid, especially with the influx of agency nurses and staffing shortages. They also feel underappreciated for remaining loyal through the shortage with the significant amount of turnover the facility has seen. They often express feeling unheard and disrespected both by administration and physicians. All of these factors compile together to make employees want to find employment elsewhere. They regularly discuss finding other jobs, and it's not uncommon to see people scrolling through posted open nursing jobs when you're at work at my facility. I think a great deal of this stems from the culture. There's a great deal of burnout due to the staffing shortage. There are more and more expectations without an increase in pay. This has resulted in a high turnover rate. Often nurses who return state they don't know many of the staff members on their own unit. Some of this is due to agency nurses filling the gaps of the staff that has left. However, the facility has been unable to fill many of those gaps, resulting in the need for the agency nurses. This culture leads to a lack of innovation. There's a lack of commitment to the growth of the facility. Conversations and how people talk shape how we perceive the world around us. We use language to make sense of the world. However, we also use those stories to shape our perspective of the world. This perpetuates our view on the world. The language we use and the relationships we foster are powerful in pushing us towards our universal goals. The pattern of relating is how people interact with one another within the organization. It is significant in shaping the culture of an organization. Organizations often form habits of relating, which points to the power dynamics within the organization. These habits must be constantly recreated or they cease to exist. These behaviors and patterns are enacted in the moment-to-moment interactions as people do their work. With every interaction, there's an opportunity for new patterns to emerge. As a result, the living present is filled with the potential to perpetuate old patterns or to create new patterns. Patterns of meeting are the themes that exist within an organization. What is the organization's visions, focus, and long-term goals? My facility's mission statement is providing state-of-the-art healthcare with integrity to people we serve. Their values include compassion, respect, excellence, service, and accountability. When I assess the organization's pattern of meeting, I feel like the organization expresses the desire to provide exceptional patient care, but often needs more resources to do so. They're often short-staffed, which leads to massive gaps in patient care. This leads to the pattern of relating, which includes a lack of morale within the organization. Much of the staff comes to work with the mindset that they're there to do a job, but it doesn't feel as though there is an overarching organizational goal. There's a significant feeling of burnout that causes the staff to have frustration with one another, with physicians, and with administration, which contributes to poor communication. How you speak in an organization can reinforce and stabilize culture. It's important to be authentic and meaningful. Communication is collaborative. Purposefully listening and attending to conversations without distraction is significant. Being present in the moment and participating and contributing to the organization and being mindful of those around you is also incredibly important. In order for there to be innovation, the leader must be able to dwell in the chaos and see the potential that emerges. They have to be able to build trusting relationships, have a curious attitude, and they have to rehumanize the workplace, removing the element of shame and allowing vulnerability. They also have to understand that there are multiple right answers often. There might be more than one way to get there. They have to understand that meaning is dynamic and it is transformed through interactions and relationships. And healthcare is chaotic, and it can induce many different emotions from team members. They have to embrace the disorder and see the potential that emerges from it. A great deal of the staff at my facility feels hopeless regarding the lack of change. They feel unheard when they do express opinions and feel like their ideas are either dismissed or belittled by administration. As a result, innovation is often suppressed. In order to change the story, one must lead with communication. They have to build trust. Mutual respect is yours to build. You have to speak the same way to someone's face as you do behind their back. You also have to show compassion. Language is a clue to culture. You have to give voice to people's feelings. You have to provide stability. You have to let people feel free to experiment, and they have to be able to succeed or fail. And you also have to create hope. You have to offer inspiration and optimism. Before we can retell the story, there are multiple things we need to look at. First off, the patient is a leader. The patient must take an active role as a leader in their care. They should define their relationship with their provider. They need to be able to express their goals and problems and share relevant information about their condition. This starts by forming good and sustainable relationships with the care team. It's important to also recognize the nurse's role in the healthcare team as they integrate all the work of other disciplines in regard to the healing continuum. They're at the intersection of all healthcare services. Finally, it's important to notice that the provider is, in healthcare, it's important to move from a group of assembled individuals to an interactive team with one goal, patient care. An individual is ineffective and incomplete as they lack knowledge. To change the story, the organization must set the facility's values and vision as a priority, ensuring there is identity in the concepts of compassion, accountability, respect, excellence, and service. And they must attempt to change how employees interact with one another, physicians, and administration by ensuring they know their value. They have to remove shame and jealousy surrounding innovation and promote empathy, compassion, and cooperation. This can be done by being intentional about the rhetoric and language used. You have to use language to transform the environment positively. They have to be able to listen attentively, and they have to be mindful of those around them. So now let's try to rewrite the story. A patient came in with an elevated troponin, but he was well educated on his previous cardiac history. He came to the ER with an abnormal cardiac rhythm and an elevated troponin, but he was well informed and knew who his cardiologist was. The ER physician communicated effectively with the patient in the ER and explained to him what an elevated troponin might indicate and why we might need to contact his cardiologist. The physician and the nurse could obtain orders and communicate with the patient's current cardiologist. The patient's troponin level spiked significantly. The nurse, who had been following the patient the entire day, was able to effectively communicate her concerns with the cardiologist and obtain orders for the patient, despite their ER hold status, due to collaboration and effective communication. Thank you for taking the time to listen.